Vex had never failed a hunt. Not once in her 43 years of existence. The 9-foot-tall Krillian warrior stood in the docking bay of Terminus Point mining station, her 4 arms methodically checking her weapons while her black eyes scanned the empty corridors ahead. The silence was absolute. 200 miners and security personnel had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their equipment and a mystery that the Galactic Mining Consortium was desperate to solve. Her razor-sharp claws extended slightly as she caught the first scent. Something had been here recently, something that didn't belong. The chitinous plates covering her muscular frame shifted as she moved forward, each step calculated and predatory. On her homeworld of Krelthak, only one rule mattered: kill or be killed. Vex species had evolved from that simple truth, becoming the ultimate apex predators in a galaxy full of dangerous creatures. The mining station stretched out before her like a metallic maze, but Zara's enhanced senses cut through the darkness effortlessly. She could see in thermal, ultraviolet, and standard spectrum simultaneously, her brain processing all 3 visual feeds without effort. The heartbeat of a small maintenance bot echoed from 3 levels below. The electromagnetic signature of the station's failing power grid painted patterns across her vision. Nothing could hide from a Krillian hunter. She had earned her reputation across 12-star systems by taking down prey that other species couldn't even track. The Vorthak warriors of the Sigma sector had been her most challenging hunt until she learned their weakness for honor-bound combat. Their rigid fighting traditions made them predictable. A few feints, some misdirection, and their greatest champion had fallen in her claws in less than 5 minutes. The Silthani Mindhunters had been next, creatures that could read surface thoughts and predict an opponent's moves. They hadn't counted on Vex's ability to compartmentalize her consciousness, thinking about 17 different attack patterns while executing an 18th they couldn't detect. The scratches on the wall ahead caught her attention. Deep gouges in the reinforced steel, but not made by claws or natural weapons. The pattern was wrong, too systematic. Whatever had made these marks possessed intelligence, but intelligence meant planning, and planning meant fear. Only prey needed to think their way through problems. True predators relied on instinct, speed, and overwhelming force. Vex's secondary arms reached out to touch the wall, while her primary hands remained ready to strike. The metal was cold under her fingertips, but the scent trail was warming. Recent, very recent. Her prey was still here, somewhere in this labyrinth of corridors and maintenance shafts. The thrill of the hunt began to build in her chest, a familiar sensation that had driven her species to dominate every ecosystem they encountered. The first body lay crumpled in a side corridor, and Vex's confidence wavered for exactly 3 seconds before reasserting itself. The human miner had died quickly, efficiently. No claw marks, no bite wounds, no signs of the savage feeding frenzy she expected from Predator. Instead, precise puncture wounds pierced the victim's chest and skull. Clean, surgical, almost respectful in their efficiency. This confused her more than it should have. On Krelthak, predators killed to eat or to establish dominance. They tore their prey apart, marked their territory, sent clear messages about their superiority. This death felt different, purposeful but not passionate, necessary but not natural. The scent trail led deeper into the station's bowels, through maintenance tunnels that forced even Zara's impressive frame to duck and weave. Her 4 arms moved independently, one following the wall for guidance, another testing the air for chemical traces, the 3rd and 4th ready to strike at the first sign of movement. The cramped conditions would normally favor smaller prey, but Zara had adapted to hunt in every environment imaginable. She had tracked the ice wraiths through the frozen caverns of Helios Prime, creatures that could freeze the moisture in an opponent's lungs with a single breath. Their mistake had been believing that cold was their ally. Vex species regulated their body temperature internally, and her chitinous armor conducted heat so efficiently that the ice wraith's freezing attacks only made her stronger. The Gethmoran death dealers had been different, apex predators on their own world with natural camouflage that made them nearly invisible and neurotoxin that could drop most species in seconds. They had hunted in packs, coordinating their attacks with terrifying precision. Vex had defeated them by becoming something they couldn't understand, unpredictable. While they planned their coordinated assault, She had simply walked into their den and challenged all 6 of them simultaneously. Their pack tactics meant nothing when their opponent refused to run or hide. Now, she was tracking something new, something that left precise wounds and vanished without a trace. The rational part of her mind suggested caution, but 43 years of successful hunts had built an unshakable confidence. The universe had a natural order, and she stood at its apex. Everything else was simply prey wearing different disguises. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, some kind of equipment storage area, filled with massive mining machines. Vex's thermal vision picked up the residual heat from recently used machinery, but no living signatures. The scent trail split here, branching in 4 different directions like some kind of tactical retreat. Clever for prey, but cleverness only delayed the inevitable. She chose the strongest scent and followed it through a maze of pipes and conduits, her confidence building with each step. Whatever this creature was, it was trying too hard to hide. True apex predators didn't need to skulk through maintenance tunnels and improvise weapons for mining equipment. They announced their presence and dominated through superior force. The trail led to another body, this one positioned almost ceremonially in the center of a small junction room. The same precise wounds, the same efficient kill, but something felt wrong about the placement. Too convenient, too obvious, as if someone wanted her to find it. For the first time in decades, Vex felt a small flutter of uncertainty in her chest. She pushed it down immediately. Uncertainty was for prey. She was Krillian. She was Apex. And whatever was playing games in these corridors was about to learn the difference between being clever and being dangerous. The deeper levels of Terminus Point reeked of recycled air and machine oil, but underneath those familiar scents lurked something else entirely. Vex's 4 nostrils flared as she analyzed the chemical signature. Carbon-based, definitely. Mammalian, possibly. But the proportions were all wrong for any species in her extensive mental database. Too much iron in the scent, suggesting high oxygen carrying capacity in the blood. An adaptation for sustained activity rather than bursts of predatory speed. The third body waited for her in Maintenance Tunnel 7, positioned with the same deliberate care as the others. But this time, Vex noticed something that made her chitinous plates ripple with unease. The miner's tool belt was missing specific items. Not random theft, but careful selection. A plasma cutter, a molecular welder, a gravity hammer. Someone was building an arsenal from industrial equipment, and they knew exactly which tools could be weaponized. Her thermal imaging caught movement 3 levels above her current position. Brief, bipedal, moving with purpose through corridors that should have been empty. Vex's 4 arms spread wide as she prepared to leap upward through the maintenance shaft, her claws finding perfect grip points in the metal framework. The hunt was finally beginning in earnest. She emerged into Corridor 12, just in time to see a shadow disappear around the far corner. The footsteps were wrong, though. Too light for the creature's apparent size. Too measured for something running in fear. This wasn't prey fleeing from a predator. This was something else entirely. Vex followed the sound through a maze of identical passages, her confidence returning as her superior senses locked onto the trail. Whatever this creature was, it couldn't hide from 43 years of honed hunting instinct. The scent grew stronger with each turn, leading her deeper into the station's operational heart, where the massive fusion reactors hummed with barely contained energy. Then the trail vanished completely. Not faded, not diverted, simply gone, as if her quarry had ceased to exist between one step and the next. Vex stood motionless in the reactor chamber, all 4 arms extended, every sense straining for the slightest trace of her target. Nothing. Even her electromagnetic perception, capable of detecting a heartbeat through solid steel, found only the background radiation of the fusion cores. A sound behind her made her spin around, claws extended and ready to strike. Empty corridor, but something had been there. She was certain of it. The displacement of air, the barely audible scrape of fabric against metal. Her prey was watching her, studying her, learning from her reactions. This should have been impossible. The Krillian sensory suite had evolved over millions of years to track and kill the deadliest predators on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds. No creature could simply disappear from her awareness and reappear at will. Yet something was doing exactly that, moving through her detection grid like it didn't exist. Vex began to move more cautiously through the station's corridors, her arrogance slowly giving way to something she hadn't felt in decades: the need to actually think about her approach. The creature was clearly intelligent, capable of long-term planning, and possessed technology or abilities that let it avoid detection by her enhanced senses. But intelligence was just another tool, and tools could be countered by superior instinct and overwhelming force. The reactor chamber's main console had been accessed recently. Someone with surprising technical knowledge had bypassed 3 different security systems and downloaded the station's complete layout, including maintenance tunnels, emergency protocols, and structural weak points. Vex studied the access logs with growing unease. The download had occurred less than an hour ago. Her quarry wasn't just hiding from her. It was preparing for her. A metallic clang echoed from the ventilation system above her head. Vex looked up just as an improvised explosive device, cobbled together from mining charges and reactor coolant, detonated in a burst of superheated plasma. Her reflexes saved her life, forearms moving independently to shield her vital organs, while her legs launched her body away from the blast zone. The explosion wasn't meant to kill her, she realized as she rolled to her feet. It was meant to test her capabilities and reaction time. Her prey had just conducted a field experiment on her. The intercom system crackled to life, and for the first time, Vex heard the voice of whatever had been stalking through these corridors. Male. Calm. Speaking in perfectly articulated galactic standard with an accent she couldn't place. The tone held no fear, no excitement, no emotion at all. Just cool, analytical assessment. Impressive reflexes. Your species' reputation for combat effectiveness appears to be well-deserved. 4 independent limb responses, thermal dispersion through chitinous plating, and cognitive processing fast enough to analyze and counter an unexpected threat. I'm curious about your tactical adaptability under sustained pressure. Vex's claws scraped against the metal flooring as rage built in her chest. This creature was talking to her like she was a specimen in some kind of behavioral study, like she was the subject of its hunt rather than the hunter. The natural order of predator and prey was being inverted in ways that made her instincts scream warnings. What are you? She snarled into the nearest intercom pickup, her voice carrying the subsonic harmonics that could paralyze most species with instinctive terror. Something you haven't encountered before, came the measured reply. Your hunting pattern suggests you classify threats based on physical capabilities. Strength, speed, natural weapons, sensory acuity. It's an effective system for apex predators operating within their evolutionary niche. But you're not in your niche anymore. The voice paused, and Vex could hear the faint sound of movement through the station's ventilation system. Her quarry was repositioning while they talked, using the conversation as cover for tactical maneuvering. The realization sent a chill through her exoskeleton. This wasn't random predator behavior. This was military thinking. I've been watching you for the past 2 hours, the voice continued, studying your movement patterns, reaction times, and decision-making processes. You're faster than I expected, stronger than most species I've encountered, and your sensory capabilities are genuinely impressive. But you hunt like an apex predator. You assume superiority and expect your prey to behave accordingly. Another sound, this time from behind her. Vex spun around, but found only shadows and the steady hum of machinery. Her quarry was everywhere and nowhere, speaking from hidden positions while remaining completely invisible to her enhanced senses. The problem with apex predators, the voice said, now coming from a different direction entirely, is that they've never learned to be afraid. Fear teaches caution. Caution teaches survival. And survival teaches adaptation. Your species skipped those lessons by being too successful too early in your evolutionary history. Vex's forearms trembled with barely controlled fury. This creature was lecturing her about evolution and survival while hiding in shadows like a coward. But even as anger clouded her thoughts, a deeper part of her mind was beginning to register a disturbing truth. Whatever was speaking to her had analyzed her species' evolutionary history, understood her hunting patterns, and developed countermeasures in real time. This wasn't just intelligence. This was something far more dangerous. Show yourself, she demanded, moving toward what she hoped was her quarry's latest position. Face me in open combat if you dare. Combat. The voice held what might have been amusement, I'm not interested in proving anything through violence. I'm interested in solving a problem. You're here hunting the same thing I am. The difference is that you think you're hunting me." The realization hit her like a physical blow. There was something else on this station. Something that had killed the miners and vanished without a trace. Something that both she and this mysterious creature were tracking. But if that was true, then what had she been following for the past 3 hours? "You've been following my trail." The voice confirmed her worst suspicions. "I've been using your superior tracking abilities to map the real threat's movement patterns. You're an excellent bloodhound, Vex of the Krillian hunting clans. But you're hunting the wrong prey." The shadows moved, and Vex finally saw her tormentor step into the dim emergency lighting of the reactor chamber. He was smaller than she had expected, barely 6 feet tall, thin by Krillian standards, with pale skin and dark hair. No visible natural weapons, no chitinous armor, no obvious adaptations for predatory life. He looked like prey that had wandered into the wrong section of the galaxy. Then she noticed his eyes. They held no fear, no submission, no recognition of her as a superior predator. Instead, they studied her with the same analytical coldness she had heard in his voice, like a scientist observing an interesting, but ultimately predictable specimen. The expression made her claws itch with the need to demonstrate exactly how wrong his assessment was. "You're human," she said, the word carrying undertones of dismissal. Humans were tool users, scavengers who had somehow talked their way into galactic civilization despite lacking any noteworthy physical capabilities. They were barely above the pest species that infested cargo holds. "I am," he replied, pulling what looked like a modified plasma cutter from his improvised armor. The weapon had been extensively rebuilt, its industrial housing replaced with components that clearly belonged to military-grade equipment. "And you're about to learn why that matters." Vex struck without warning, all 4 arms moving in a coordinated assault that should have ended the conversation permanently. Her claws, capable of slicing through starship hull plating, met empty air as the human simply wasn't where he had been a microsecond before. He hadn't dodged with superhuman speed. He had moved exactly far enough to avoid her attack, while positioning himself for a counterattack she hadn't seen coming. The modified plasma cutter fired, its beam scoring a line across her left secondary arm before she could adjust her position. First blood to the prey. The impossibility of it froze her in place for a crucial half-second, and the human used that hesitation to put more distance between them. "Your attack pattern follows a predictable sequence," he explained calmly, as if they were having a theoretical discussion instead of engaging in mortal combat. "Primary arms lead with slashing strikes to disable weapons and create openings. Secondary arms follow with precision strikes to vital organs. Legs position for either pursuit or defensive stance, depending on target response. It's an effective system against most opponents." Vex launched herself forward again, this time varying her approach and attacking from an unexpected angle. The human was ready for her, rolling under her strike and coming up with a gravity hammer that had been modified into something resembling a war club. The impact against her chitinous plating sent shock waves through her nervous system, disrupting her balance and coordination. "The problem," he continued, swinging the hammer in a defensive arc that forced her to retreat, "is that your tactics assume your opponent will react with fear or desperation, flight, or uncoordinated counterattack. You've never fought something that studied your species' combat patterns and developed specific countermeasures." The human's weapon work was unlike anything Vex had encountered. He didn't try to match her strength or speed. Instead, he used her momentum against her, redirected her attacks into walls and machinery, and turned every aspect of the environment into a potential weapon. When she tried to corner him in a narrow passage, he triggered an emergency blast door that forced her to retreat. When she attempted to use her superior reach advantage, he drew her into areas where the low ceiling negated her size benefits. "My species didn't evolve to be apex predators," he said, dodging another strike and responding with a precise cut from his plasma weapon that found the weak joint between her armor plates. "We evolved to hunt apex predators. There's a significant difference." The words hit harder than his weapons. Vex had built her identity around being the ultimate predator, the final expression of evolutionary perfection. The idea that something could evolve specifically to hunt creatures like her was philosophically devastating. Impossible, She snarled, pressing her attack with increasing desperation. The apex predator is the end point of natural selection. Nothing hunts the hunter. Earth had apex predators too, the human replied, setting up another improvised trap for mining equipment. Saber-toothed cats with claws that made yours look like toys. Cave bears that weighed 3 times what you do. Dire wolves that hunted in coordinated packs. All of them faster, stronger, and better armed than the scrawny apes that shared their territory. Vex found herself being herded through the station's corridors, each exchange of blows leaving her slightly more damaged while her opponent remained maddeningly elusive. Her thermal vision showed his body temperature rising from exertion, but his movements remained precise and calculated. He was pushing himself to his physical limits, but never beyond them. Those apes learned something your species never had to, he continued, leading her into what she belatedly realized was a prepared killing ground. Multiple escape routes, improvised weapons positioned at strategic intervals, and clear lines of sight for ranged attacks. They learned that being physically inferior doesn't matter if you're tactically superior. The trap closed around her with mechanical precision. Gravity mines triggered in sequence, not to kill, but to limit her movement options. Plasma cutters fired from hidden positions, forcing her into increasingly desperate defensive positions. The human moved through it all like he had rehearsed every step, turning her superior strength and speed into liabilities that worked against her. "We didn't just hunt megafauna to extinction," he said, his voice never losing its calm analytical tone even as he systematically dismantled her defenses. "We hunted the concept of apex predator to extinction. On Earth, nothing stays at the top of the food chain once humans decide it shouldn't be there." Vex realized with growing horror that she wasn't fighting an individual. She was fighting the culmination of millions of years of evolutionary pressure that had produced something unprecedented in galactic history. Not a species that filled an ecological niche, but a species that eliminated ecological niches entirely. "Your people became apex predators by being better at what nature rewarded," the human continued, and now she was trapped, wounded, and running out of options. "My people became apex predators by changing what nature rewarded. We don't adapt to environments. We adapt environments to us." The final trap was elegantly simple. Vex's own aggression had driven her into a dead-end corridor where her size and reach advantages meant nothing. The human stood at the exit, modified plasma cutter trained on her position, completely calm despite having just dismantled one of the galaxy's most feared predators. "The question now," he said, "is whether you're intelligent enough to recognize a superior predator when you see one, or if your instincts are going to force you to keep fighting a battle you've already lost." For the first time in her adult life, Vex felt the alien sensation of being prey. The human wasn't just better armed or luckier. He represented something that her species' evolutionary history hadn't prepared her to face, a predator of predators. Something that had evolved specifically to hunt and kill creatures exactly like her. "What do you want?" she asked, the words bitter in her throat. "The same thing you do," he replied, lowering his weapon slightly. "To find whatever killed those miners. The difference is that I know we're going to need each other to do it. Because the real threat on this station is something that makes both of us look like amateurs." The human lowered his weapon completely and extended what Vex slowly recognized as an offer of assistance. She stared at his outstretched hand, her mind struggling to process the concept of mercy from a superior predator. On Krelthak, victory meant death for the defeated. The idea that someone could demonstrate dominance and then choose not to exercise it was beyond her understanding. "My name is Marcus," he said, maintaining the same calm tone that had characterized their entire encounter. "I've been tracking the real threat for 6 days across 3 different systems. It's not what you think." Vex remained motionless, every instinct screaming contradictory messages. Accept the alliance and admit inferiority. Refuse and face certain death. Neither option fit her worldview of predator supremacy and natural hierarchy. The miners weren't killed by a predator, Marcus continued, pulling up holographic displays from a portable scanner she hadn't noticed him carrying. They were killed by something that uses predators. Parasitic organisms that take control of nervous systems and use the host body as a hunting platform. The scanning data showed microscopic organisms unlike anything in Vex's extensive xenobiology database. Segmented, adaptive, capable of interfacing directly with neural tissue. The implications hit her like a physical blow. These creatures didn't hunt in the traditional sense. They turned other species into unwilling weapons. The precision wounds, the strategic positioning of bodies, the complete disappearance of the station crew, Marcus explained, highlighting different aspects of the data. It wasn't predation. It was recruitment. Something was building an army from the mining staff. Vex forced herself to accept his assistance, getting to her feet, her pride warring with pragmatic necessity. The human scanner showed thermal signatures moving through the station's lower levels. Multiple contacts, moving in coordinated patterns that suggested hive mind intelligence. "How many?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "At least 40 active hosts, possibly more in the deeper sections we haven't accessed yet." The parasites seem to prefer hosts with technical knowledge and access to the station's critical systems. They've been learning how to operate human technology while using human bodies as camouflage. The tactical situation was unlike anything Vex had prepared for. Individual combat against superior predators was one thing. Fighting an intelligent swarm that could turn any defeated enemy into an additional threat was something else entirely. Her species' approach of overwhelming individual superiority meant nothing against opponents that grew stronger with each victory. "Your hunting style won't work against them," Marcus said, checking his improvised weapons and ammunition supplies. "They don't fear death because death just means temporary inconvenience until they can acquire a new host. And they've been studying both of us since we arrived." As if summoned by his words, the first wave of infected miners appeared at the far end of the corridor. They moved with unnatural coordination, tools and weapons held in grips that suggested intelligence far beyond human norm. Their eyes held no trace of the original personalities, just cold calculation and predatory focus. Vex's instincts demanded a frontal assault, but Marcus grabbed her arm before she could charge. "Not like that. They want us to fight them individually, so they can overwhelm us with numbers. We need to be smarter." The human produced a collection of improvised explosives and began setting them as strategic choke points throughout the corridor system. Persistence hunting isn't just about outlasting your prey physically. It's about outlasting them mentally, making them expend energy on desperate moves while you conserve yours for the decisive moment. Working together felt wrong to every fiber of Vex's being, but she found herself following Marcus's tactical directions despite her instinctive resistance. Her superior strength cleared debris and created barricades, while his technical knowledge turned the station's infrastructure into a weapon against the parasitic horde. The infected hosts attacked in waves, each assault more coordinated than the last, as the controlling organisms learned from their failures. But Marcus had anticipated this adaptation, leading the swarm through a carefully planned series of encounters that drained their numbers while preserving ammunition and energy. "They're learning, but they're learning human tactics," he explained during a brief lull between attacks. "The parasites can access their hosts' memories and skills, but they can't access their creativity. They're fighting like humans would fight, which means I know what they're going to do before they do it." Vex watched him work with growing amazement. He wasn't just beating the parasites tactically. He was using their own adaptation against them, turning their greatest strength into a predictable weakness. The concept of using an opponent's intelligence as a vulnerability was so alien to her thinking that she struggled to understand how it was even possible. The final confrontation took place in the station's central hub, where the remaining parasites had concentrated their forces around some kind of breeding apparatus constructed from mining equipment and organic matter. The sight of it made Vex's chitinous plates crawl with revulsion, but Marcus studied it with the same analytical detachment he brought to everything else. "Reproductive cycle requires specific environmental conditions," he muttered, scanning the apparatus with his portable equipment. "Temperature, humidity, electromagnetic field strength. If we disrupt any of those variables, the whole system collapses." The solution was elegantly simple and utterly destructive. Marcus had identified the station's fusion reactor as the key to everything. Not just power for the parasite's breeding cycle, but life support for the entire facility. One controlled overload would eliminate the threat completely, while giving them just enough time to reach the escape pods. This will kill everything on the station, Vex pointed out, the implications obvious even to her. Yes, Marcus agreed, his hands already working on the reactor controls. Sometimes the only way to win is to make sure nobody else can either. It's called strategic denial. As the reactor began its carefully controlled cascade toward overload, they fought their way through the final desperate assault from the remaining parasites. Vex's strength and Marcus's tactics proved devastatingly effective in combination, but she found herself thinking less about the immediate combat and more about the broader implications of what she had witnessed. Humans weren't just another predator species. They were something unprecedented in galactic evolution, a species that had learned to hunt concepts, ideas, entire ways of being. They didn't replace apex predators. They eliminated the very concept of apex predation by making adaptation itself a weapon. The escape pod's acceleration pressed them both into their restraint systems as Terminus Point's fusion reactor achieved critical overload behind them. Through the small viewport, Vex watched the mining station disappear in a brief starbright flash that left nothing but expanding plasma and cosmic radiation. The parasites? She asked. Gone, Marcus confirmed, checking his scanner readings, along with any chance they had of spreading to other systems. Sometimes the only victory possible is mutual annihilation. As their pod drifted toward the edge of the system, where rescue ships would eventually find them, Vex found herself reassessing everything she had believed about the natural order of the universe. She was still Krillian, still a formidable predator by any objective measure, but she was no longer Apex. What happens now? She asked. Marcus was already studying star charts on his portable display, marking systems where similar disappearances had been reported. Now we hunt the rest of them. Turns out there are more parasitic species out there than just the ones we killed today, and they're all learning that humans have entered their territory. He looked at her with something that might have been respect. Your people are excellent at what they do, Vex. But what they do is hunt individual predators. What we do is hunt entire categories of threat. Together, we might actually be able to keep the galaxy safe from things that neither of us could handle alone. For the first time in her life, Vex understood that being Apex wasn't about individual superiority. It was about systematic elimination of anything that could challenge that superiority. And humans had turned systematic elimination into an art form that spanned entire evolutionary strategies. She was no longer the apex predator, but perhaps, working with the species that had claimed that title, she could become something even more important. She could become necessary.